Hey guys, just a quick update for those of you who are interested in the process for getting a Japanese pilot license. I think there's about 3 of you who are curious about this. You'll recall about 2.5 months ago I had prepared the paperwork that they'd specified. They'd given me a list of what they wanted from Australia, and as far as my logbooks and other stuff to do with my Australian commercial license. So I'd prepared that mountain of paper and made sure it was all exactly as they'd requested, and sent that all off by certified mail to Osaka. And I've made some notes because it was quite a process the last 2.5 months. So I sent it all to them in Osaka, and then a couple of weeks later I received a return, because I had to put a return envelope in with that first lot. My return envelope came back with my original Australian pilot licence in it, because I had to send them the original. So that came back. That was all good. But it had a letter with it that said that there was a problem with my logbook entries because there was no CFI signature with them. So obviously, usually when people submit logbooks for a license in Japan, usually, of course, they're students, which means an instructor has signed all their flights, on their logbook. But of course, I've got a commercial license, so CFIs only sign my logbook when I do certifications for different aircraft and stuff. So no teachers had signed my logbook for quite some time. So that was a difficult one. So that was the first problem. So I told my friend, I told you that I've got an advocate. There's a senior Japanese pilot that's been helping me. And I think if I pushed, usually in Japan, if you push bureaucracy, it doesn't help. If you get aggressive and pushy, it doesn't help. And particularly if you're a foreigner, I think foreigners pushing the bureaucracy here, you're more likely to cause yourself harm than good. But this Japanese pilot that's been my advocate is actually a little bit, wouldn't say aggressive, but almost aggressive. He's pretty pushy. And so I told him, and he called Osaka on the phone and said, what are you talking about, CFI signature? This guy's a commercial pilot. Of course he hasn't got CFI signatures on all his flights, of course, and don't be ridiculous. And he was really quite pushy, and he actually told me he abused them, or he was aggressive, he was angry at them. That's what he said. He said he was angry at them, which is really unusual for Japanese people. Don't usually do that, but he really told them they were being ridiculous, apparently. So then Osaka, he called Osaka and really let them have it, and they didn't really give him an answer. And not surprisingly, Japanese bureaucracy, they sort of, oh geez, usually we have to have the teacher's signature. And then he called Tokyo, my advocate called Tokyo, JCAB, and said to them, Osaka's being ridiculous, they're expecting this, the rule says that you've got to have this teacher signature. But see, the whole problem is the system's geared for new pilots, new Japanese pilots, so guys that have gone through the courses and done all the courses, now they're trying to get their license for the first time. That's what the system's set up for. It's not set up for foreigners coming from another country converting. It's not set up for that. So that's why, it says on the paper it has to have the teacher's signature, and that's what the bureaucrats are looking for. Where's the teacher's signature on his logbook? And of course it's not going to be there, is it? So he called Tokyo and said, look, this is ridiculous. And then a few days, this is spread out over 2.5 months, and then a few days later he received the phone call from Osaka, and they said, didn't even mention this teacher thing, they'd moved on to a new problem, and they're saying that on my logbook, you remember in the last video I said I had to show them some triangular navigations and one navigation of more than 196 kilometres and some other cross-country stuff. What they wanted was those flights marked on a map. And of course in my logbook it says from here to here to here to here and all the details. But they wanted those details marked on a map, which I've never heard of such a thing. Of course in Australia, through the whole process from learner student to commercial pilot, never once did I have to submit a map with a flight marked on it for a license or an endorsement or something. It just never happened, you know. So, and of course, I don't have Australia WAC charts. I don't have Australian pilot charts with me in Japan, because why would I have brought them? You know, I don't need Australian charts in Japan. So I went to Google Maps, and I made a map on Google Maps showing my flights that were in my logbook for that particular requirement, and had to make it. So I spent a day making up some maps with Google Maps to show them where these flights were, and sent them off to them. And then they said the authority form, you'll remember in the last video that I had an authority form from CASA in Australia confirming that I really did have a license and that I didn't have any problems with it, and it hadn't been revoked and all that sort of stuff. But the name of the Japanese guy at JCAB and his contact details that I'd put on that authorization form had changed because someone else was looking after my case. Bottom line, I had to do another form for the Australian CASA, Civil Aviation Safety Authority, detailing the new guy in the JCAB in Japan who was looking after my case, so that he'd have permission to access my files in Australia. Unbelievable. Every time we started to deal with one of their hurdles, they'd bring in a new hurdle without dealing with the first one. So they just kept putting more hurdles in front, you know. So I did all that, and they wanted copies of my medical certificates, my aviation flight medicals, which I haven't had one of those since I came to Japan, so totally irrelevant. And they only last a year anyway for commercial pilots, so... and then they said, just wait. We'll have to wait. Okay, well, we sort of knew that was coming, didn't we? And then, a couple of weeks later, a letter came confirming all these hurdles. So we're back on the phone. Then there was nothing. Then there was more phone calls. And then finally, my advocate guy sent 2 faxes, one to Osaka and one to Tokyo, and apparently quite directly said to them, you know, this guy's doing everything you're asking him to do. He's done everything he can do. A couple of things you're asking for are ridiculous, like the CFI signature thing. But I've done everything else. I made their maps, and I did new forms for CASA for Australia, and I did everything else. So he sent these 2 faxes, one to Osaka, one to Tokyo, and said, look, it's been, you know, a couple of months. You haven't given this guy any answers. He's done everything you asked him to do. This is ridiculous. You need to give him an answer about what's going to happen, you know. And he did it really well. Obviously, if I'd sent an aggressive email, I probably wouldn't have said the right things, but he knows the way the Japanese bureaucracy works, and he knows the Japanese thinking really well, because he's a Japanese guy. So he did it really well. He put them in a position where they had to say yes or no, basically. So he sent these 2 faxes, and then a few days later, I got another letter in the post from them, and it's sort of like an invoice. It's a tax form, basically. Anytime that you do anything with the government here and you have to pay stamp duty or some sort of fee, you get a form. It's like a tax form. You have to complete it, and then you have to take it to the post office. And you give it to the post office, and this one was for 3,000 yen. So I gave it to the post office with 3,000 yen. They put it in the machine, print on it, and they stamp it, and they give it back to you. And then there's another piece of paper that comes with it. It's an A4 piece that has, you write your name and address and all your details, and then it has a rectangle like this. The rectangle's the same size as the receipt, and you have to glue the receipt to the rectangle and send it back to them. And that's standard. Any time that you have to pay some fee with the government, that's often what you have to do. It's probably some old system from 100 years ago, but they still do it. Even though they've got computers and everything now, they still do this gluing the piece of paper onto the receipt onto another piece of paper. So somewhere in Japan there's a huge warehouse full of pieces of paper with other pieces of paper glued onto it, because they don't need it because it's on the computer. But anyway, so the post office computer knows I paid it, but they still need the piece of paper. So I did all that. And what else did they want? There was another piece of paper they wanted with it. Oh, every time I send them something, I have to include a self-addressed envelope to myself so they can send stuff back. And everything has to be certified mail. And what you send them has to be certified mail, and your self-addressed envelope has to be certified mail, always. It's just what they do. So every step has involved that. So it's back to the post office, more envelopes, everything else. So Did all that, and there was another piece of paper in there saying that I have to attend some safety meeting with for pilots to discuss safety once every 2 years or something. So anyway, long story short, then this turned up in the post. So it's a Japanese private pilot license. So finally, fantastic. Unfortunately, the photo, as with all bureaucracies, they pick the worst possible photo. I look about 80 years old and I've got a head like a mushroom, but anyway. So that means I've got that. Now the next step is I have to do their aviation medical, which is always strict in most countries, but I believe it's even more strict here. It includes brain scans and all sorts of stuff. So the next step is to do the aviation medical, and once, if I can get through that, if I can pass that, then I'll be able to fly. Of course, the only other hurdle that's still there is the radio operator's license that we discussed in the last video, and that is still going to be a hurdle. But now I've got the license, once I pass the medical, the aviation medical, it means I can fly as pilot in command, and I just need somebody on board who's got a radio license, even if they're sitting in the back seat. Which means that this kind advocate that's been helping me out, once I pass the aviation medical, I can take this, I can go rent an aeroplane, and I'll just take that kind guy with me, and as long as he's in the aeroplane, I'll be able to fly pilot in command anywhere in Japan. So it's getting better. So next step, aviation medical, and then the next video after that we should be able to get some footage of flying around Japan somewhere, and then the next hurdle after that is going to be that radio operator's license, which is going to be a big one. I don't know how we're going to get through that. Electronic radio electronics in Japanese, reading and writing in Japanese, so it's going to be a hurdle, that one, but one step at a time. So more videos coming soon.